Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, King in Black issue number 3 of 5. I tried to do this review twice. I failed. I just made it a half an hour long, and I don't want it to be that. I tried to play 7 Days to Die over top of doing this, and I was more interested in the game than I was in this comic book. It is what it is. So I'm just going to make this short and sweet and just explain some stuff. The people involved in this book, Chapter 3, Thunder. Donny Cates, writer, Ryan Stegman, penciler, inks, J.P. Meyer, Frank Martin doing the color art, letters, VC's Clayton Cowles, Stegman, Meyer, and Martin do the cover art, bunch of variant covers, logo design, Patrick McGrath, and Jay Bowen does the dressing. This issue is called Thunder because Thor shows up. Thor shows up, of course, it's a big fight, and then he gets his butt kicked. Why? Because he's dumb and he turns around. Just like, when the heel and the face are fighting in WWE, and all of a sudden the entrance music of somebody else shows up, and the face gets, or somebody gets up and gets distracted. They're just about to win, but they get up and they're like facing like, all right, come on down, I'm ready for you. But like nobody shows up because it's just a distraction. And then there's the roll up for the pin. Yeah, that's exactly what happens here. Thor, who Thor has been in more fights than I could possibly imagine. You know what I'm saying? In several lifetimes. This guy has been through a millennia of fights. Not just that, excuse me, it's not just that he's a millennia old. He's been in a millennia worth of fights, right? That have sometimes lasted months with no sleep. And this dude somehow, like, he's fought some of he's fought the dishonorable trolls, right? The backstabbing giants, the frost giants. He's fought against Malekith, who's one of the most deceitful people there is. He's brother to Loki, the most deceitful person there is. And somehow he was dumb enough to turn his back because the Sentinels were activated. And mind you, the Sentinels didn't even do anything. They didn't even do anything. But Thor gets snuffed because he's stupid and he turns his back to his enemy in a fight. Like, it was just. You'd think that the guy freaking knows better. With his history and everything, you'd think he knows better, right? My God. I learned this in the martial arts when I was 8. Anyway, so yeah, that happens to Thor. At one point, freaking the Silver Surfer shows up at the end of this. It's not a spoiler at all because there is nobody who read the blue narration text in this and didn't know right away that that was going to be Silver Surfer who was talking. It was like the way that somebody who doesn't care about the Silver Surfer was going to write the Silver Surfer. Does anybody remember the last time that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby ever worked together? I think it was the last time on Silver Surfer for sure. I think it was the last time that they ever actually even worked together. Period. Was this one Silver Surfer comic book where they actually redid the Silver Surfer's origin, which didn't work. The art was it was still Kirby, but it still wasn't great Kirby. But the story itself, like it wasn't written like a good Stan Lee work at all. You could tell these guys just didn't want to work with each other anymore. It's just like let's do some sales, but the book was just horribly uninspired. Even then, at least they were. It seems like they were trying a little bit here. Like the tropes are so ridiculous that even if some way somehow you didn't see the blue narration text and no right, and I'm saying like that's the way that this writing was. It was like that version of that writing. It's like here's one of the guys who created the Silver Surfer for crying out loud, and the writing was uninspired. Likewise, the writing here horribly uninspired for Silver Surfer. Like this isn't the surfer of the sky, the cosmic spaceways and the philosophical spacefarer. Like this was just some guy who was feigning a person who was philosophical. This was not good at all. Um, Him showing up should have been obvious even if you didn't read the comic book and you just looked at the pictures because at the end of the day you know that Donny Cates wrote the Silver Surfer. He's writing Thor. He's always gonna have these things show up. I'd be surprised if Thanos doesn't show up at some point in here. You know what I'm saying? I would genuinely be shocked if it wasn't Thanos who put the nail in the coffin for freaking Null. If that happens, I'm telling you right now, Donny Quinn should just quit writing. Right? Donny Quist just quit completely. I know it sounds mean, but yeah, I'm done with trying to be nice with stuff. I've tried so many times, and I was just so done with this. Guys, you know how an ancillary issue is supposed to work by now. I hope this might be the first time somebody's looking at one of my reviews. An ancillary issue is similar to a tie-in, in the fact that when you have an event, you have a tie-in, meaning that like the Jessica Jones King in Black stuff is a tie-in because she's got a regular series going, and then in that series, one or two issues is going to be called King in Black. That's going to be put up on top, so this has something to do with that. It's trying to get people to read that, and it's a chance for people who are reading that to come over and read this, and therefore to read the Venom stories also. That's the whole purpose of an ancillary issue, or excuse me, of a tie-in. An ancillary is when you've already got an Iron Man comic going and you don't have any reason to have a tie-in in there, but you want to have an Iron Man story, but you want to have complete control over it instead of telling the person who's writing the current story to do it. You simply write an ancillary issue. So it would be like King in Black, Iron Man, and that's it. It's not a it's not its own series. It's just a one shot or 3 issues or whatever. All right, that's an ancillary issue, and that's what should have happened here with Iron Man specifically, because you got several pages, several panels at least, of him explaining to Reed Richards something that he shouldn't have to explain. And in the previous issue, you had him doing stuff. In the previous issue before that, you had him doing stuff. And it's like all of that should have happened in here because one, it doesn't seem like my man's Donny Cates understands what an ordinal number is. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. Stuff that my kid right now is learning in kindergarten. No, you think I'm joking. My 5-year-old is learning ordinal numbers in kindergarten here in Canada. And yet Donny Cates doesn't seem to understand that when you have first, second, third, second is actually important. You don't just go first, third, fifth. That you don't start skipping things. There is no segue in here. There's just, we're going to jump to a different scene. I've complained about this before. Here I am again, voicing the exact same thing. A year later, because nothing's changing. In fact, he's actually getting worse. All of the Iron Man stuff should have been a tie-in. So we can have editor's note to say, hey, look, I know we've got lots of other ancillary issues like and so-called tie-ins like the Atlantis attacks and the Union and the Namor and all these other stories that don't really have anything to do with anything and they don't matter. You don't need to read them. They're not required reading. But if you did want to read them and give us money, we wouldn't be mad at you. Yeah, cute. You could have had an Iron Man ancillary issue that would have mattered because he would go and he would fight this dragon. It would get infected with the extremists. He'd have to figure this stuff out. And instead of just a couple pictures of he's got the circly things in his eyes. It could have actually been something where it looks good. And it could have been something where it's explained, where we could have said, oh, crap. Okay, wait, this is interesting. And when the editors note, hey, if you haven't been reading the ancillary issue for Iron Man King in Black, you don't understand what's going on here. And everybody would look at it and say, okay, I clearly need to read this because what the heck? A tie-in that actually matters? An ancillary that actually matters? Wow, imagine that. Imagine that. The Blade one would have been good also. And again, these are things that I've mentioned before. There's nothing different here. You might as well just go back and look at issue 2 review because, But it does actually get worse because Spider-Man tries to be cool to Dylan, and Dylan's like, no, I'm going to kick some butt. But of course, he's a stupid kid, and he doesn't kick anybody's butt. And I'm sure he's going to kick butt at some point because they're saying he's going to kick butt. But instead, we try and get this thing where it's like, hey, Donny Cates, who's the king of tropes, the absolute master god emperor of tropes. What's a good way to show that a character is awesome? Oh, wait, I know. The final panel of this. Let's have Dylan grab Captain America's shield mid-throw. Because that's always a good way. Because, let's face it, when you don't have any idea who Captain America is, you at least know that Captain America's shield is a symbol of freedom and awesomeness and stuff like that, right? So if Captain America is throwing a shield and Dylan's just like, I'm going to need this for a minute. And he just catches it effortlessly and stuff like that. It's like, oh shit, that's what we're supposed to feel. That's what we're supposed to feel. I don't know that anybody actually felt that with this. I feel like we've seen this so many times before. At this point, it's like if you haven't caught Captain America's shield, what kind of a scrub are you? Right? No. Think about that. This is like Mick Foley yelling at Vince McMahon on his jet way back in the day, post-Attitude Era. Where he's just like, there's so many belts in the division right now that if you don't have a belt, shame on you. You're not worth anything because there's so many belts. Everybody should have a belt. How do you not have a belt? Right? All these things, they're all just things that, even the tropes have been explained and they don't need to be anymore. I'm sorry. maybe you're not as old as me. Maybe you're not 45 years old and have been reading comic books since you were a wee lad. You know what I'm saying? Or a wee lass. But I'm sorry, doesn't this just scream of how far back do we have to go? X-Men Inferno? Do you need to go back that far? How about just last year? How about just the year before that when we had the poisons thing with Cullen Bunn? Right? Like how far do you need to go back to see that this has been done too many times? You might say, well, Bill, did you like the art? Is that Dylan or is that Bucky? Because he's actually reaching out with his left shoulder. It looks like a shock that he's doing to possessed Cap, because nobody knows who Cap is. And it's not like the shield looks like it's too big for him. It looks like it's the exact right size for him. So it's not even drawn, like, it's just a silhouette, and the silhouette couldn't even be done like a proper size. This stuff is ending with Legacy issue number 200. I don't know exactly what issue of Venom that's going to be, but it can't be soon enough. Like, this just isn't drawn well. This isn't done well. Obviously Thor was going to show up. Obviously. Obviously the Silver Surfer is going to show up at the end of this. Obviously. Obviously it's not going to matter that he shows up. That none of this stuff is actually going to matter. None of this stuff means anything. None of it means anything. There's just so many tropes in this. It's actually beyond redundant. Do you guys know who Julie Schwartz is? If you don't know who Julie Schwartz is, I imagine it says a lot about, like, if you really like this comic book but you don't know who Julia Schwartz is, I think that says a lot about why you would like this comic book. It's not meant to be an insult. It's meant to be an observation. That's what this is. And I hope that people have a strong enough sense of self to understand that. I'm not naming your name and saying you suck and you don't know anything about comic books. That's not what I'm doing here. You're allowed to like this comic book. You don't need my validation to like a comic book. But if you've never seen this stuff done before, then perhaps it would make it easier for you to like this comic book. But for me, I literally look at it as, this isn't worth liking, this isn't worth anything, because I've seen this stuff before, redone so many times. I'm sorry, Infinity Gauntlet, the Infinity War, the Infinity Crusade, all three of those. We've seen the doppelganger type, or the possessed by a Clintar type thing, the demonic version. We've seen these things happen. I think I'm getting allergic to bad comics. We've seen this stuff happen so many times. I have no energy to get angry over it anymore. I have no energy anymore for this stuff. It's just really bad. Julie Schwartz is the former head of DC Comics, and for a really long time. And during the time that he was there, they have never sold, for the most part, anything on the numbers that Marvel has sold. Yeah, that includes Batman. You go back and you look at the stuff, and people just simply weren't buying these comic books the way, like, Batman was obviously the best selling comic. It's always been the case. But for the most part, like, Hulk was outselling Superman. You know what I'm saying? Spider-Man was outselling pretty much everything that they were doing. Wolverine, The Thing. These characters were way bigger than anything. Could you imagine The Thing being bigger than Superman? He was. He honestly was. Go back and look during that period of time. Look for any stories that actually mattered, any arcs, any runs, anything that actually mattered, that didn't have some kind of redundancy in there. Because the thing that Julie Schwartz was very famous for saying during his tenure there was, hey, you don't have to write something original. Don't waste your time with that nonsense, okay? Instead, just simply go back 5 years ago from the date that you're looking and see what was being done back then and just redo that. Just rehash it, put your own spin on it, whatever, and go. That's all that comic books has to be. And that's a reason why Make Mine Marvel was not just a saying that Stan Lee came up with. It was a moniker that we all agreed with. Marvel was infinitely better than DC. And anything in DC that wasn't done with that style, like Green Arrow, Green Lantern, that was quickly canceled too, wasn't it? It was like, what, a year and a half of that or something like that? The stories that didn't follow that theory, that were getting a little bit too far out of the way. Oh, sure, Eisner Award winning and stuff like that, sure. But it's not following the simple trope that we always use of just rehash stuff. So Julie Schwartz eventually canceled those books. It says a lot. It says a lot. Deadman is one of the big characters in DC, if you can even call a character in DC that, who's not Superman or Batman. He's one of the big characters over there, and he's basically a character who possesses people and makes them do whatever he wants them to do. I feel like the ghost of Julie Schwartz is Deadman, and he has possessed Donny Cates, because at this point there is nothing. This bears repeating. Nothing coming out of Donny Cates that is original. It's he's even at this point monikering himself. He's copying off himself from the what happened in the Carnage event, the Absolute Carnage event, except to lead to this event, an event to set up an event. That's just not the way that things are done. It's simply not. This is just a rehash of that, which is rehash of the poisons, which is a rehash of the three cosmic things with the Infinity Gauntlet and the Cosmic Cube, which is a rehash of freaking Inferno. We just, and there's so many others that I can include in there also. The stuff with Onslaught, like there's just so much that has been rehashed. And at this point, the best you could do is say, well, yeah, but it's good for the new readers. Original stuff is good for the new readers too. You know what I'm saying? The stuff that, if this gets you into comic books, you don't turn around and just go, oh, well, let me go and start looking at some of the other stuff. And oh, wow, you know what? I didn't realize this stuff had already been told. Because it's really demeaning to us. It's really demeaning to everyone who buys, who spends their hard-earned money. Like, dude, we're still in COVID times. We're in the times where there are people who really need these freaking checks coming out and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Not everybody's doing great right now. My money comes from outside of Canada. You know what I'm saying? Like, I am really successful right now doing my English teaching classes. You know what I'm saying? I can afford to get comic books. And yet I don't want to spend my disposable income on them anymore. Not anything that has Donny Cates' name on it, at the very least. Like, this is pitiable. It's not even that it's pitiful, it's pitiable. I actually feel bad for the man at this point, because we hyped him up and he bought into his own hype. He starts the cult of Cates and starts selling freaking merchandise. And at the end of the day, you'd have to be a Kool-Aid drinking cult member to say that this guy is doing anything original. Like, nothing that he does isn't predictable. Painfully so. In multiple ways. Multiple ways. Look, even his English, obviously he doesn't understand his math very well. Let's see if he understands his English. The ... thing that is way overused, and I've complained about this before with Cates. The way this is supposed to be used is a sentence trailing off because you don't want to be redundant, okay? I can say, what's something I could say? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So when Johnny started emulating his father's bad behavior, ... You get it? You don't have to explain. And this is not just if you're telling a story, maybe you go on a little bit further. But like the ... means the sentence trails off because everybody knows. Everybody's in on it. Like, it's a work. Everybody knows, what's about to happen next. Everybody knows what you're going to say. There's no need to get into it. When he started following in his father's footsteps, you knew he was going to get into a life of crime, just like his father. He was going to go to jail, just like his father. And he was going to fail at his life, just like his father. Like, duh, we know. There's no need to be redundant. Donny Cates uses the ... trope. It must be at least 30 times in this comic book. I think it's used more than there are pages in this comic book, for crying out loud. It's multiple times, even on the same panel, and not a single time is it ever used correctly. Like I said, I just don't have the energy anymore. I don't have the crayons to explain why this is so wrong. Why at the end of the day, every single thing about this comic book is predictable, and it's not the way comic books were ever meant to be written once Marvel came along and said, we can actually change this game. We can actually make this into something amazing. At the end of the day, I honestly believe that Donny Cates is the worst thing in Marvel or in comics, period. Why? Because if you hear somebody who's got a beautiful voice, And it's not even just that they're singing, but they could be singing, or they could be reciting poetry, or they could just be a public speaker. They're talking, and you start listening to the things that they're saying, and it's like, oh my God, this guy, he's so filled with confidence. He knows what he's doing, like boom, 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 and like, wow, and I want to be like him, and I want to listen to him, and he's very charismatic and very influential, and boom, 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 boom. But it turns out he's actually telling you to slit your wrists. All right, and that's not what Donny Cates is saying. But like, if we're going to take this outside of Donny Cates, you know, Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot and even Christ, even Leopold II. These people are all known to be very influential speakers. People who you listen to what they've got to say, whether it's written word or otherwise, right? That when they communicate, you're filled with confidence that this person knows what they're doing. And then you actually go in and look at what they're doing, and it's abhorrent. I know this is going to seem like, did you just compare Donny Cates with Hitler? No, I'm comparing his writing with cult leaders. All right? Like a Charles Manson, like the Hale-Bopp comet thing, the Branch Davidian. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, I am. I'm making that far stretch because this is the extreme that you need to go to understand where exactly I'm going. I'm not saying that he's going to lead people to slitting their wrists or drinking Kool-Aid with Drano in it. Okay, I'm not saying those things, or to go and start killing gypsies and gays and Jews. I'm not saying that. Here's a far extreme, and I'm saying that he's close. He's headed in, like, that's the direction that we can actually see the influential speaker thing going, or the influential writer in this particular case. Maybe I lost you on this. I'm totally okay with that. This isn't how I make my living. You know what I'm saying? I know there's going to be a lot of people who will also say, "Oh, I can't wait to see you write a comic book." You know, maybe one of these days I will. Maybe one of these days when I have the time to sit down and actually put together a comic book, maybe I will. And you know what? Maybe it'll freaking suck. It doesn't change anything. Because at the end of the day, if I don't know how to cook and I go into a restaurant and I sit down and I order something and the food comes out and I say, I didn't really like the taste of this, you don't get to say, yo, well, I can't wait to see you open up a restaurant and put together food. I don't care if you like the food at that restaurant. I don't. And I have the right to not like the restaurant. And it only gets better if I do actually know how to cook and I do get to explain, even without actually, being a cook myself, to be able to say, it's just too salty. The stuff is just burnt. You know what I'm saying? It feels like this, like the onions aren't even caramelized. Like, do you know how to fry things? I don't have to be able to do it better myself to be able to say I didn't enjoy the taste of the food. And the more I can get into why I didn't like it only goes to further my argument. So that maybe you could say, well, I don't like caramelized onions. I like when things are rare. I like it when things are too salty and hypertension exacerbates. I like it when stuff like that happens. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with you liking those things. I'm literally going out of my way to explain, with a history of comic books, that this doesn't stand. This is not going to stand the test of time. I don't even think that Absolute Venom or Absolute Carnage was memorable. I don't think that this is going to be memorable either. I think that all of this is just, it's a whole lot of fluff, trying to make it look like it's something. It's like, what do you call it? Cheap carbs, right? It's cheap carbs. It's basically Chinese food. Here you go, stuff your face. You'll be hungry again in an hour. You know what I'm saying? By the way, that's not real Chinese food. Chinese food is not real Chinese food. I've spoken. This is heartbreaking to see that so many people are just, wow, because that means that Marvel is going to do more of it. And the more that Marvel keeps on doing this stuff, those people right now who are loving this stuff are clearly people who haven't been reading for a long time. And that's not an insult. If I call you old, it's not an insult. If I call you young, I don't see how that's even more of an insult, all right? It's not an insult. If you're new to comic books, I can see how you'd be enamored by this stuff. But I think that the longer that you're reading comic books, the more you're going to see this really was just cheap carbs. That's all this is. There's nothing inspiring about this. There's nothing amazing about this. I said, I don't have the energy to, because obviously nobody's listening. Dude, Donny Cates seems like a good person. Seems like at least a fairly decent person. You know what I'm saying? Um, but I really believe he's bought into his own hype big time with this stuff. The art, none of this stuff is inspired. None of it is inspiring. I don't see any of this going anywhere. I don't see any of this becoming the next big movie. I don't see any of this being anything particularly special. So it is what it is. And honestly, I have genuinely given. I did two reviews that both went a half an hour long each. I was playing a video game for about a half an hour, trying to talk about the comic book also, and I just got so bored with doing the review, I just started playing the video game. So I have literally given, and now this one's going about half an hour. I've given 2.5 hours to try and explain the stuff wrong with this comic book and being as nice as I possibly can. And I just realized that that's what's actually hampering me. That's what's limiting me. I can't give a hot take and be polite with this. So I'm going to put this out there. I want to know how this ends. There's no way that this ends in a good way. There's just no way. All right. Quote me now, praise it later. You know what I'm saying? There is no way that this ends in some amazing way. It's going to end in something that's going to lead to the next thing because Donny Cates, all he does, all this guy knows how to do is to tell a story to get us hyped for another story. And at some point, it's like, dude, no thanks. Sometimes you like closing. Sometimes we don't want the dusty finish. Go and look up the dusty finish in wrestling. Sometimes we want an actual resolution. Sometimes we need to see Hulk Hogan win at the end of the show and start posing so that you know the good guys won and there's a light at the end of the tunnel and all's right in the world. And yeah, sometimes that's what we need to see because this dark and gloomy stuff, yeah, I don't need this. I don't think any of us do. And it's going to get old real quick. Guys, I'm done. Like the video, watch an ad. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.